I stood in the rain, my suitcase completely drenched, mascara streaming down my face as my in-laws slammed the door right in front of me. They had the nerve to say I wasn't good enough for their precious family. But just when I felt like I had absolutely nothing left to lose, the sky cracked with thunder, and my billionaire father's private jet touched down right behind me. Before we dive in, smash that like button if you agree that no one deserves to be put down because of where they come from. And definitely subscribe for more stories about how life can flip the script on cruelty. And stick around till the very end, because karma is about to make a grand entrance, louder than any jet engine. The first time I walked into the Bennett mansion, I honestly thought I'd wandered into some kind of dream. Everything just gleamed. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and walls that seemed to whisper tales of unimaginable wealth. I remember clutching my little purse for dear life, afraid to even breathe too loud, like my mere presence might somehow mess up their perfect world. I had married into a reality where gold wasn't just something you wore. It was in the air, it was how they lived, and they weren't shy about showing it off. And me? I was just a girl from a regular, modest neighborhood who'd fallen head over heels for someone I thought saw past all of that. Ethan always made me feel like I was safe. When he asked me to marry him, he promised, "My family will absolutely adore you once they get to know you." And I so badly wanted to believe him. Love, I thought, could conquer anything. Status, money, class, it wouldn't matter. I wore my mom's simple pearl earrings on our wedding day, believing they held all the good luck I'd ever need. But the second I said, "I do," I could feel the weight of invisible eyes, sizing me up, comparing, judging every single thing about me. His mother was the first to speak after the ceremony. Her smile was strained, almost like it hurt, as she leaned in close and said, "You look simple, dear." Ethan's always had a good heart. Stung, but I smiled anyway. I tried to convince myself that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe she was just nervous, too. But as time went on, I realized her words were just the opening shot in a silent war I had unknowingly signed up for. The house was gorgeous, no doubt, but it was so cold. I did my best to try to make it feel like a home. Fresh flowers on the dining table, little thank you notes for the staff, laughter echoing through the halls. But every single thing I did was quietly undone, like my attempts at kindness just didn't belong there. The maids wouldn't even make eye contact with me, terrified of upsetting the real queen of the house, my mother-in-law. Ethan's father, a strict man with graying hair, barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was only to remind me to act appropriately at family dinners. Those dinners were complete torture. The table stretched on forever, loaded with food that looked way too fancy to actually eat. His family would go on and on about stocks, golf clubs, art auctions, and political donors. I tried my best to follow along, to add something, anything, to the conversation. But the second I opened my mouth, the whole room would go silent. All eyes would turn to me, and I could practically hear them wondering what someone like me could possibly have to contribute. When I was finished speaking, his sister would smile politely, tilt her head, and say something that made everyone burst out laughing, usually at my expense. Ethan would squeeze my hand under the table, silently telling me to just let it go. So I did over and over again. But inside, something was starting to break. Every morning, I'd wake up way before everyone else, just to sit in the garden where nobody looked at me like I didn't belong. I missed my old apartment, the sound of my mom's voice, the smell of coffee wafting up from the little cafe downstairs. In that mansion, silence was the loudest thing of all. Even so, I held on. I told myself that love took patience, that maybe if I proved myself, if I dressed better, spoke softer, smiled more, they would finally see me. I wanted them to see the woman Ethan saw when he chose me. But no matter how hard I tried, the walls of that mansion just kept whispering the same cruel truth every single day. I was the outsider, the unwanted guest, the poor bride who had the nerve to dream too big. And yet, deep down, I refused to give up hope. I believed love could change things. I believed they'd eventually come around. I foolishly believed that being kind was enough. What I didn't realize was that this was just the quiet before the storm, the part where you think the world can't possibly hurt you anymore, right before it does. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. And before long, I started to understand that love wasn't always enough to survive in a house built on pride. At first, it was little things, little jabs disguised as jokes, subtle glances across the table whenever I spoke. But as time passed, the cruelty got bolder, more deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Started with my clothes. One morning, I came downstairs wearing a soft peach dress I'd bought ages before the wedding. My mother-in-law glanced at me from her chair and smiled faintly. "How quaint," she said, her voice dripping with something sharper than sugar. "But darling, that color makes you look more provincial than polished." Her daughter giggled, sipping orange juice from a crystal glass, while Ethan just sat there silently, eyes glued to his phone. I told myself it didn't matter. That fashion wasn't who I was. But every word she said sank deeper into my skin. Soon, the conversations around me became weapons wrapped in silk. They'd talk about family histories, pedigrees, and old money, all while making absolutely sure I knew exactly how far below their standards I was. "Your father runs a shop, doesn't he?" his sister asked one evening, her tone all innocence, but her smirk unmistakable. "How humble. We haven't actually shopped for ourselves in years." The whole table erupted in laughter. My cheeks burned, but I forced a smile. Ethan looked up for a second, then looked back down again. He didn't say a word. I started to disappear into myself. Every room in that mansion felt smaller, heavier, colder. I learned to eat in silence, to nod politely when they made fun of me, to laugh when they laughed. But when the lights went out at night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, my heart aching with questions I couldn't bring myself to ask. Was I really not good enough? Had love blinded me so much that I didn't see what I was walking into? The turning point came one afternoon when I overheard them talking in the sitting room. I was carrying a tray of tea, something I often did just to feel like I was being useful. My mother-in-law's voice drifted through the doorway. "She's nothing but a charity case. Ethan could have married anyone. Instead, he brings home a girl with no class, no name, no money." My chest tightened, and before I could sneak away, I heard Ethan's voice, soft, hesitant, but not in my defense. "Mother, please, let's not talk about it now. Not she's my wife. Not you're wrong." Just a quiet plea to avoid a scene. That hurt more than anything she could have said. I stopped bringing tea after that. I stopped trying to join their conversations. I became a shadow in my own home, floating from one room to another like a ghost, present but unseen. When guests came over, I was introduced as Ethan's wife with a smile that barely hid their embarrassment. Sometimes when I walked into a room, their laughter would just stop. I'd feel their eyes on me, judging, picking me apart, waiting for me to mess up. And I did mess up once, at a dinner when my hand shook and I spilled a few drops of wine on the tablecloth. The silence that followed was as sharp as glass. "Careful, dear," my mother-in-law said. "This isn't the kind of table you're used to, is it?" The guests laughed, and I felt something inside me quietly shatter. From that night on, I learned to survive behind polite smiles. I played the part they expected, the polite, obedient, unremarkable wife. But deep inside, something was changing. The hurt was turning into a quiet kind of strength I didn't yet recognize. I didn't know it then, but those nights of silent tears, those days of humiliation, they were forging something inside me. A fire. A strength that would one day make even the cruelest among them beg for forgiveness. But for now, I stayed quiet. I endured because sometimes the most dangerous kind of strength is the one that waits. It happened on a night that was supposed to be a celebration. Ethan's parents were throwing one of their famous charity galas, an evening of glitter, champagne, and high society pretense. I spent hours getting ready, carefully picking out a pale rose gown I'd saved for months to buy. It wasn't a designer label, but it was elegant, graceful, and it made me feel beautiful in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. For a second, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be different that night. When I walked downstairs, the ballroom shimmered under golden light. Laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses filled the air. People were dressed like royalty, and I tried to blend in, smiling politely, clutching my clutch tightly to hide my shaking hands. Ethan was standing by the bar, surrounded by his colleagues. When he saw me, he gave a half smile, small, hesitant, and then turned back to his conversation. My heart sank a little, but I kept walking, telling myself I could make it through one evening without falling apart. The whispers started early. Women glanced at my dress and exchanged knowing looks. A man chuckled softly and said, "She's sweet," like a school teacher trying to fit in. I pretended not to hear. I smiled until my cheeks hurt, nodded until my neck ached, but inside I was crumbling piece by piece. Then came the moment I'll never forget. As dinner was announced, everyone gathered near the stage. Ethan's mother, glowing in her diamond-studded gown, took the microphone to welcome the guests. Her words flowed smoothly, practiced and perfect, until she paused and turned toward me. And of course, she said with a smile that could cut glass, "We must thank everyone who helped make tonight possible. Our family, our dear friends, and all those who truly belong here." Laughter rippled through the room. I froze. The last words echoed like thunder in my ears. Those who truly belong here. My chest tightened. My throat burned. I felt every single pair of eyes on me. She turned away casually, as if she hadn't just stripped me of every ounce of dignity I had left. I looked at Ethan. He stood beside her, silent, his jaw tight, but his lips unmoving. No defense, no word, not even a glance. It was the confirmation I didn't know I was waiting for. I didn't belong. Not to them and not to him. When I tried to slip away quietly, she stopped me. Her voice was calm, cutting through the noise. "Elizabeth," she said, "if you're uncomfortable, perhaps it's best you take some time away from our home. Maybe, indefinitely." Gasps filled the room. My legs went weak. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. Ethan looked at me then, his eyes empty, resigned, and that silence was louder than any insult. I walked out. Nobody stopped me. I grabbed my small suitcase, the one I'd packed weeks ago, just in case my worst fears came true. The marble steps gleamed beneath the light rain outside as I stepped out into the cold night air. I remember standing there, soaked, shaking, mascara running down my cheeks, the laughter from inside still echoing faintly, like ghosts mocking me from the warmth I no longer had. I didn't know where to go. Every part of me wanted to disappear, to vanish into the night and forget I'd ever been a part of them. I sank to my knees by the iron gates, clutching my suitcase, whispering to myself, "You're done, Elizabeth. It's over." And just as I whispered those words, thunder roared above me. I looked up, and through the gray clouds, a bright light split the sky. The ground shook, the air trembled, and for the first time that night, the sound of something powerful, something unstoppable, filled the silence. I didn't know it yet, but that sound wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of their reckoning. The rain poured harder, washing over me as if the sky itself wanted to erase the pain clinging to my heart. My suitcase lay half open on the pavement, clothes spilling out like the pieces of a life I'd failed to protect. I pressed my trembling hands against the cold iron gate, tears mixing with the rain. For the first time since I'd stepped foot in that mansion, I felt utterly alone. Then, through the storm, I heard it. A distant hum, low at first, then growing louder, stronger. The sound didn't belong to thunder. It was something mechanical, powerful, and deliberate. I lifted my head and saw bright lights slicing through the clouds. Within seconds, the night sky split open with the roaring descent of a private jet. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that sound. I knew that insignia gleaming faintly under the lightning. My father's jet. I stumbled backward, heart racing. My father, Charles Hamilton, hadn't spoken to me in nearly 3 years. The day I chose Ethan, he told me quietly but firmly, "Elizabeth, love without respect isn't love. It's self-destruction." I didn't listen. I told him love was worth more than pride. I walked away from his empire, from his fortune, from his protection. And tonight, I was living with the consequences of that choice. The jet's door opened with a hiss, and through the mist and rain, a tall figure emerged. Even before I saw his face, I recognized his stride. Steady, commanding, the walk of a man who never bowed to anyone. Behind him, security guards rushed forward, umbrellas snapping open, shielding him from the storm. But he brushed them aside and walked straight toward me. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice steady, deep, and painfully familiar. "What have they done to you?" The words broke me. I hadn't heard my name spoken with that much love in years. I tried to answer, but all that came out was a sob. He removed his coat, an elegant gray wool coat, and wrapped it around my shoulders, ignoring the rain soaking through his own suit. "No one," he said quietly. "No one humiliates my daughter and gets away with it." Before I could even process his words, black cars rolled up behind the jet. His team of advisors, bodyguards, and drivers stepped out, forming a small army under the downpour. I felt a mix of fear and relief. The world that had rejected me was about to learn who I really was, the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the country. As we drove toward the mansion, I sat in silence beside him. He didn't scold me. He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply held my hand, the way he used to when I was a little girl, afraid of thunderstorms. Outside, the rain softened, and I saw the mansion lights glowing in the distance. The same house that had thrown me out was about to face the man I'd once defied for love. When we arrived, the guards opened the tall iron gates as if the iron itself obeyed his command. Ethan's parents stood frozen on the steps, disbelief written all over their faces. My mother-in-law's hand flew to her mouth. My father-in-law straightened his jacket, trying to hide his panic. Ethan appeared behind them, drenched in guilt, his eyes darting between me and the man beside me. My father didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than their entire empire. "You threw her out," he said finally, his voice calm but thunderous. "You mocked her. You made her cry in the rain." He paused, letting the words hang like judgment. "And yet everything you own, your business, your reputation, your comfort, stands on the investments my company made." Gasps filled the air. Ethan's father stuttered. We didn't know." "You didn't care to," my father interrupted. "But tonight you'll learn what happens when you forget who holds your foundation." I stood there beside him, wrapped in his coat, trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the justice that was about to unfold. For the first time in years, I wasn't the outsider, the poor bride, or the charity case. I was my father's daughter. And as I looked at those who had laughed at me, I realized something powerful. Sometimes the storm doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to reveal who's truly standing with you when the sky opens up. The rain had stopped, but the tension in the air was heavier than any storm. The lights from the mansion poured across the driveway, cutting through the mist that still lingered like a ghost of the night's cruelty. My father stood tall, his presence alone commanding silence. The people who once laughed at me now whispered among themselves, their faces pale, their arrogance crumbling 1 second at a time. He looked around, his eyes sharp as steel. "This," he said, his voice calm but resonant, "is the family that threw my daughter out into the rain?" His words weren't loud, but every syllable carried an authority that needed no volume. The guards behind him stood perfectly still, while Ethan's family stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or disappear. Ethan took a hesitant step forward. "Sir, I didn't mean for..." "Didn't mean for what?" My father interrupted, his eyes piercing through him. "Didn't mean for her to cry? To stand outside like a beggar while your family mocked her?" Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like a man finally realizing the depth of the silence he had chosen. My father turned his gaze to my mother-in-law. "You must be proud," he said coolly. "You've raised your son well, to watch the woman he married be humiliated without lifting a finger." Her chin trembled. "Mr. Hamilton?" she began, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's a misunderstanding. We've always cared for Elizabeth. Perhaps emotions were high tonight." "Stop." My father's voice cut through her lie like a blade. I built an empire on truth and integrity. Don't insult me with excuses. I know how your family treats people who don't come with a price tag. Unfortunately for you, I also know how much your precious company depends on mine." Gasps rippled through the air. Ethan's father stepped forward, his voice cracking. "You're mistaken. Our partnership is solid, decades strong." My father pulled a folder from his assistant's hand and dropped it on the marble steps. "Not anymore," he said coldly. "As of this moment, every contract, every deal, every investment my company made in yours is terminated. I don't do business with people who forget what humanity means." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother-in-law's knees buckled, her carefully crafted poise crumbling as reality set in. Ethan's father turned white as a ghost, his empire, his pride, disintegrating right in front of his eyes. Even Ethan, who had once stood tall beside me, now looked like a man watching everything he valued slip away in a single breath. Then my father turned to me. His tone softened, though his power still filled the air. "You have nothing to prove to them anymore, Elizabeth. You were born with a worth they could never measure." He reached for my hand. "Come home." But before I could take his hand, my mother-in-law fell to her knees. "Please," she whispered, desperation leaking from her voice. "Don't ruin us. We made a mistake. I made a mistake." For a moment, I just stood there looking down at the woman who once made me feel so small. The same woman who had laughed when I spilled a drink, who had whispered that I was lucky her son took pity on me. I should have felt triumph. I should have felt satisfaction. But all I felt was clarity. "You didn't just ruin my marriage," I said softly. "You ruined the one thing I believed could make us a family, and that can't be rebuilt." With that, I turned away. Behind me, I could hear the sobs, the pleading, the chaos unraveling. But I didn't look back. My father placed his arm gently around my shoulders as we walked toward the waiting car. The sound of my heels on the marble was steady, each step a reminder that I was done kneeling before anyone who thought my worth depended on their approval. As the car door closed, I took one last glance through the rain-streaked window. The same mansion that once made me feel invisible now looked small, like a fading memory. My father's voice broke the silence as the car began to move. "You see, Elizabeth," he said quietly, "the world never truly humiliates you unless you start believing you deserve it." And for the first time in years, I believed him. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of my father's private estate, a place I hadn't seen since the day I walked away from it. Everything was familiar yet foreign, like a memory trying to find its way back home. I stood there in silence, wearing one of my old robes, staring at my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, I saw someone who wasn't broken. I saw someone who had survived. My father entered the room quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You always liked it with honey instead of sugar," he said softly, placing it beside me. I smiled, a real smile this time. "I didn't think you'd remember." He chuckled. "Elizabeth, I never stopped remembering. I just waited for you to remember who you are." That sentence stayed with me. It wasn't anger in his tone. It was forgiveness, warmth, pride, and for the first time since that nightmare began, I felt peace. Later that afternoon, he called me into his study, a room filled with books, maps, and portraits of strong, relentless people who had built everything our name stood for. On the mahogany desk lay a stack of documents. "This," he said, gesturing toward them, "is your next chapter. The company's new foundation arm will be under your name. You'll decide where our money goes, who we help, what we stand for." I was speechless. "Father, I don't think." He interrupted gently. "You've already proven you can endure more than most people ever could. You've shown grace under cruelty, compassion in the face of arrogance. That's the kind of strength empires need." Tears welled up in my eyes. I had spent so long trying to prove my worth to people who were never capable of seeing it. And yet, the only person I'd needed to prove it to was myself. Over the next few weeks, the headlines were everywhere. Hamilton Holdings withdraws from Bennett Enterprises. Social elite in scandal after family feud exposed. The world that had humiliated me was now forced to watch as everything they'd mocked me for became their downfall. But I didn't celebrate their destruction. I simply moved forward. I poured my time and energy into rebuilding myself and building something that mattered. I started a program for women who had been silenced, shamed, or belittled in relationships that had stripped them of their confidence. We helped them find work, stability, and a new sense of self-worth. And self-worth once more. I encountered survivors, dreamers, fighters, and within the tapestry of their experiences, I discovered my own healing. One evening, as I was leaving the office, a news report flickered across the lobby screen, capturing my attention. The Bennett family had filed for bankruptcy. Ethan stood outside their opulent estate, his head bowed in what seemed like defeat, encircled by a swarm of reporters. Strangely, my heart felt no pang of pain or ache. Instead, I whispered a silent prayer. It wasn't a prayer fueled by revenge, but one laced with hope for redemption, because I deeply understood the feeling of losing oneself. I simply hoped that he would someday stumble upon the peace that I had finally managed to unearth within myself. As I stepped outside, a gentle breeze caressed my face. The sky was awash in a golden hue, remarkably similar to the color of the jet that had once pierced through the storm clouds to rescue me. My father stood patiently by the car, his face radiating with pride. "Ready to go?" he inquired. I nodded, a sense of resolve washing over me. "Yes," I replied, my voice firm and unwavering. "For once in my life, I truly am." As we drove along the coastal road, the sun began its descent, transforming the water into a shimmering expanse of liquid light. I leaned back, gazing at the horizon as it blurred into a canvas of endless possibilities. And as the jet soared into the sky later that night, lifting me into an atmosphere no longer burdened by sorrow or regret, I came to a simple yet profound realization. What they had desperately tried to destroy had inadvertently made me stronger. I was no longer defined as the naive and vulnerable bride. I wasn't their source of embarrassment or their unwanted burden. I was Elizabeth Hamilton, the daughter of a billionaire, yes. But more significantly, I was a woman who had finally grasped the empowering truth that dignity, once reclaimed, has the power to make even the most heartless people kneel in acknowledgement. Because when life seemingly throws you out in tears and despair, sometimes it's merely clearing the runway, preparing you for your greatest takeoff.